Chapter 1. The Return. I hadn't been back to that part of the country in over 10 years. The map on my phone blinked the last few turns in a pale, uncertain blue as if it didn't want to commit to the narrow, tree-lined road. It was the same road that, when I was a kid, seemed to go on forever. Past the rusted mailbox with a crooked flag, past the creek where I once nearly drowned trying to prove I was big enough, past fields that smelled like cut hay in the summer and frozen earth in the fall. Only now the trees had grown taller, their branches knitting together overhead in a dark canopy that made the drive feel like something out of a dream I was walking back into. When Grandpa died, the call came on a Tuesday. I'd been in the middle of a spreadsheet and an endless video meeting about quarterly projections. His name lit up my phone and, for a second, my brain registered it as background noise. Then I heard his voice, older than I remembered, tired at the edges, and I knew something had changed. He had been living alone up there for years, the kind of man who kept his troubles locked in the same way he locked his shed, with a bolted door and silence. The will read like a story Grandpa would have enjoyed writing himself. In his spidery handwriting there was a line, "To my boy, the cabin is yours. Take care of her. Don't let her go dark." Dark in his letters didn't just mean unlit. It meant forgotten. Dead. Empty. He had made sure I knew, in a way only he could, that the place was not just timber and nails. It was a living thing with roots and grudges and history. He'd given it to me. The only thing left after him, besides the quiet in the hallway, was this ramshackle house in the woods and the echo of the stories he'd told me when I was small enough to believe in everything. My father didn't like it. He didn't say much, just a clipped, "You sure you want that?" when I told him. He had a way of smearing concern across his words like grease on a wrench. Functional, expected, never soft. "It's a money pit," he muttered. "He didn't fix anything. Forrest eats that place every winter. You'd do better buying something in the city." He didn't mention the fact that he hadn't gone up there in years. He didn't mention that he'd once stopped by and found Grandpa sitting on the porch, staring at the tree lean for longer than a man should, and that nothing came of that pause except a quiet drive back down the hill. Maybe that was the reason, too. Maybe he didn't want me to see what Grandpa kept warning about without ever answering the question directly. I left on a Wednesday. Work dragged its deadlines behind like a trailing anchor, but I cleared my calendar. I packed a duffel, grabbed the old keys Grandpa had left in a drawer under the ornamental owl in the legal envelope, and drove north. The city fell behind me in a smear of brake lights and freeway concrete. The highway gave way to two-lane roads, and the two-lane roads gave way to cracked asphalt swallowed by moss. Eventually, the GPS lost signal altogether, and I was navigating by memory, by childhood intuition, by the smell of damp pine after a light rain. The cabin appeared around a bend, half hidden by birch and cedar, like it had been taking a breath for years and was finally ready to exhale. Up close, it was worse than I remembered, worse in a way that felt both honest and familiar. The roof sagged at one corner. The porch railing had been reclaimed by grapevine tendrils. The paint, once a potential cheerful blue, was chalked into flakes. But the stone foundation held. The windows, though caked with grime, hadn't caved. The front step creaked the same way under my weight that I remembered it creaking under the weight of a 12-year-old who thought he was invincible. The door stuck for a moment, as if it too was startled to see me. When it gave, it released a smell. Dust, cedar, old paper, and something else. Something metallic that I couldn't immediately place. It was the smell of time settled and held in place, like a thick layer of dust that had become part of the air itself. Inside, the cabin hadn't changed much from the last time I'd been there. Not in the way that seemed like a frozen museum. It felt like someone had stepped out for the afternoon and never came back. Grandpa's recliner leaned crookedly in the corner with a patchwork blanket draped over the back. The stone fireplace held cold, gray ash that hadn't been disturbed in months, maybe years. Books lined the shelves in no particular order, their spines cracked and softened from long use. An old radio sat on the mantel beneath a cracked photograph of my grandfather when he was younger, before the lines carved deeper into his face, before the quiet got heavier. The photograph had a note scribbled on the back, "Keep the light on. Shadows forget their names when the room breathes." The living room had that same peculiar stillness that used to creep over me when I stayed there as a kid, like the house was watching its own reflection. I made coffee with the percolator in the kitchen, the steam curling upward like hesitant smoke signals. The cabin had a rhythm, and I was an outsider stepping into it again. I turned the knob on the ancient oven like I was activating a relic, pulling forward drawers to find dishes. The kitchen felt lived in, though none of the food was fresh. Canned goods lined the shelves, their labels yellowed and soft at the edges. I found a crock pot with a dried ring of something crusted around the rim, a jar of pickles from a summer long past, and a handwritten list on a scrap of paper pinned by a thumbtack above the sink. Check the seal on the well. Keep the door closed. Don't forget the tapes. The last line sat there, underlined twice. I stared at it, thinking it was some leftover quirk of Grandpa's humor. Tapes of what? Radio shows? Old music? The kind of thing someone obsessed with the past would catalog and then forget why. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing what felt like maintenance on memory. I swept decades of dust from the corners, opened cabinets to find mugs with faded slogans, shook out moth-eaten curtains, and pulled a box of old records from beneath a tarp in the attic hatch. The attic itself was an archaeological dig of my grandfather's life. So many layers of careful accumulation, like he'd been saving entire seasons of himself in case someone ever came back to pry them open. It was late, and the sun had started to drop behind the trees when I did the thing I didn't realize I'd been avoiding. Walked back into the kitchen and looked at the pantry. The built-in shelf had always been there. In my memory, it was filled with jams and extra plates, the kind of thing you kept within reach for guests who didn't come often. Now, while moving it to dust behind and beneath it, I noticed something that hadn't been as clear when I was a child. The wall behind the deepest part of the shelving didn't sound like the rest of the wall. Hollow, yes, but carrying a tone, like a low drum struck. I should have left it. I could have told myself it was just the quirks of an old cabin, settling and shifting, creating phantom acoustics. Instead, the old part of me, the part who always wanted to know what was behind the curtain, beneath the floor, under the peel of paint, started working. I moved the shelf forward, scraping the warped wood against the floor. The nails that had held it in place creaked in protest. Behind the shelf, the plaster was slightly uneven. The paint didn't match perfectly. The seam was subtle, as if someone had gone to lengths to disguise what lay behind. The edges were sealed with something thick and old. It was like dried putty, yellowed, almost skin-like, and it resisted my first few attempts to pry it with a butter knife. I went to the drawer where Grandpa kept tools. He always had tools for things no one else's hands knew the weight of, and brought back a flathead screwdriver. I began to work at the edges. It wasn't just caulk. It was layered. There were thin strips of something, wood, resin, beneath the surface. When I finally got a corner to give, the old seal crumbled in flakes, and the door behind it was revealed. It wasn't a door like the rest of the cabin. The wood was smoother, thicker, painted over so many times the grain had almost vanished. No handle, no knob, no keyhole, just a seamless face built into the wall, flush as if it had always been part of it and also not. The outline of it looked like a square cut out and then softened back with layers of paint until it became something only a careful eye would find. I stood there, breathing hard, the smell of old sealant and dust filling my nose. The edges of that door were warm to the touch, almost unnaturally so in the cool evening air. I ran my hand along the surface. There was no draft. No sound came from behind it. But even with the house quiet, the room felt thicker, like the air had weight, and something beneath it was waiting. Not in any violent way, but in the slow, patient way someone waits for a door to open that they know belongs to them. I didn't open it that night. Instead, I cleaned around it, and when darkness came, I sat in the living room with a lamp on low, listening to the floorboards creak in the way they'd always done. The woods outside whispered with wind, and the cabin settled like something relieved to know the door had been seen. I told myself I'd come back in the morning with a plan. Pry it fully open, see what was behind. Maybe it was an old storage space. Maybe it was just a mistake Grandpa had sealed in frustration. Maybe it was something harmless that had frightened him enough to hide it. Just before bedtime, I found an old notebook tucked beneath a stack of magazines in the coffee table. The cover wore the imprint, "Notes. Don't lose them." Inside, in his handwriting, was a line I'd forgotten had ever existed. Under a heading dated decades earlier, it read, "If she ever opens it, tell him to listen. Promise me." The handwriting trailed off into scratches as if interrupted. I turned the page. Below it, in the same quivering script, "I can hear it again. He's getting restless. The cabin is the lock, but I am the key. Keep the door closed. Keep the door closed." That's the last thing I read before the headlights of a truck rolled slowly past outside, making the window panes hum. I lay awake that night, not because I was afraid of the door itself, but because for the first time, the silence of the house wasn't empty. It carried the weight of a promise I didn't understand yet. Somewhere beyond that threshold, the past was still breathing. Chapter 2. The Tapes. The morning after I found the hidden door, the air inside the cabin felt heavier, as if the house knew I'd crossed some unspoken threshold. The birds outside chirped like usual, and the sun sliced across the floor through the dusty blinds, but none of it felt normal anymore. I didn't rush back to the room. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, nursing a lukewarm cup of instant coffee, just listening, to the wind, to the house settling, to my own breathing. Something in me hesitated, like cracking that wall had cracked something deeper. Eventually, I grabbed a flashlight and went back. The narrow space behind the wall wasn't even a proper room. It was like a crawlspace someone had crudely carved out. There were wooden crates stacked along the far wall and a folding metal chair placed strangely in the center. Dust floated thickly, and the air smelled like old paper and rusted metal. I crouched down and started opening the crates. Inside the first was a collection of notebooks, thick, leather-bound, and covered in my grandfather's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The same angular script he used in birthday cards and old notes he left around the house. The second crate was filled with cassette tapes, not labeled by date or topic, just numbers. Tape 1, Tape 2, and so on, all the way to Tape 29. Sitting on top of them was a small, battery-powered recorder. Same kind Grandpa used to carry in the garage to dictate his to-do lists. I remembered him muttering into it while fixing shelves or changing spark plugs. I picked up Tape 1. Back in the living room, I sat cross-legged on the floor like a kid about to watch a Saturday morning cartoon. I popped fresh batteries into the recorder and slid the tape inside. I pressed play. Click. Hiss. Silence. Then his voice. "Well, if you're hearing this, I'm probably gone by now. And you found the room I told no one about." I froze. His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was a weight to it. He cleared his throat. "This isn't a confession." "Not really. It's a record. For you. Because I think you're the only one who might understand." The next 10 minutes unraveled slowly. He spoke in a soft, deliberate tone. He talked about the cabin, not as a place to fish or relax, but as a barrier. That's the word he used. "I built that wall not to hide something," he said, "but to keep something contained." He didn't go into detail. Just said he had seen things after returning from the war. That's some knowledge, once it's in your head, doesn't leave. That it grows, spreads, like mold in the dark. "I started writing them down," he said. "Not just to remember, but to trap them. Thoughts can trap other thoughts. Paper holds them in place better than your mind ever could." It sounded like rambling. But the more he spoke, the more it felt intentional. Like each sentence had been rehearsed. As if he was planting breadcrumbs I was supposed to follow. At one point he paused. "If you're tempted to listen to all the tapes at once, don't. Space them out. Read the journals in between. The more you hear, the more you see. And the more you see, the more it sees you." He ended Tape 1 with a strange laugh. A dry chuckle, almost apologetic. Then, click. I didn't move. I just sat there with the recorder still in my hand, the tapes trailing off into silence. My hands were shaking, slightly. Maybe from the caffeine, maybe from the sudden rush of adrenaline. I didn't know what I'd expected. A confession about a hidden child, maybe, or money stashed in the walls. But this was something else. I put the tape aside and reached for the first journal. Its pages were yellowed, stiff from age, and filled edge to edge with tight, careful handwriting. The first entry was dated 1962. "The dreams returned last night. Same path through the woods. Same figure in the distance. But this time it turned its head. I need to stop sleeping in the cabin. It's stronger here." Chapter 3. The Journal Entries. I must have sat there for over an hour, just reading. At first, the entries didn't seem to follow any linear story. More like fragments, bursts of memory, unease, and some kind of cryptic self-monitoring. But after a while, I started to notice patterns. Repeated phrases. Symbols scratched in the margins. Entries marked with tiny black dots in the upper right corners, almost like warnings. One of the earliest passages stood out right away. July 14, 1962. There's something beneath the floorboards in the cellar. I heard the knocking again last night. Same time, 2:16 a.m. It's not plumbing. I checked twice. Nothing mechanical sounds like that. The entries that followed became more frantic. July 17th. It moved. The hatch was half open this morning. I never opened it. July 19th. I saw a shadow crawling up the basement stairs. Not walking. Crawling. He kept returning to that same theme. Something beneath the house. Something that watched from the dark. But what chilled me most wasn't just the content of the writing. It was the change in my grandfather's voice over time. The confident, structured tone from the early pages gave way to short, erratic bursts of paranoia. Sentences lost their shape. Words were crossed out and rewritten again and again. And then came the symbol. It was like an eye. Not a literal one. More geometric. A small triangle set inside a larger spiral, always drawn in red ink. At first, I thought it was decorative. But then I noticed it appearing in the middle of sentences, replacing words, showing up between journal entries without any context. Sometimes it stood alone on a page, surrounded by empty space. I flipped to an entry dated 1971, 9 years after the first. The handwriting was shakier now, as if written under physical strain. March 4th. I made the mistake of staring into the mirror too long. I saw something standing behind me. But when I turned, I was alone. It wasn't me. It wore my face, but the smile was wrong. It knew I could see it. I think the eye is a door. Or a lock. I don't know anymore. I hear breathing now, even when I'm awake. The next few pages were blank. Then, abruptly, an entry with no date. They always ask the same question. Do you remember the basement? I don't answer. I can't. I'm afraid I'll say yes. But the truth is, I remember all of it. By the time I finished that journal, the sun had dipped low enough that long shadows stretched across the cabin floor. The room had gone cold without me noticing. I felt like I'd spent hours holding my breath. A pressure built up in my chest. Not panic exactly, but something close. A sense that something was unfinished, and that by opening that wall, I had started something I couldn't stop. I returned to the hidden room with a flashlight and examined the rest of the crates. Some contained old photos, most of people I didn't recognize. Men in forest ranger uniforms, women with tight hairdos and solemn eyes, children standing outside the cabin with stiff postures. On the backs of some photos were short phrases in my grandfather's handwriting. Third from left disappeared, 1974. Eyes wrong. Don't trust. In the last crate was a black shoebox wrapped in twine. Inside it, more tapes, unlabeled this time, and a small square mirror, wrapped in flannel. I pulled it out slowly. It looked ordinary at first. Just a handheld mirror, maybe from the 1950s. But as I turned it, I noticed something unsettling. No matter what angle I held it at, the reflection always seemed slightly off. A half-second delay in movement. A flicker around the edges. A depth behind the glass that felt unnatural. There was a note beneath it, written in red ink. If you use this, be sure you're alone. You'll want to know who's really behind you. I left the mirror on the table that night and went to bed without brushing my teeth. The weight of it stayed with me, in my thoughts, in my chest. I didn't sleep easily. And just before I drifted off, I thought I heard knocking. Faint, like it came from somewhere under the house. 2:16 a.m. Just like in the journals. Chapter 4. The Knock. The knocking woke me up with a start. My heart pounded against my ribs like a warning drum. For a moment, I thought it had been a dream, the kind of half-remembered echo your mind plays in the quiet hours. But no, it was real. Soft. Repetitive. 3 slow knocks. Then a pause. Then 3 more. I lay still, staring at the cracked ceiling, the moonlight spilling in faint beams through the window blinds. My breath was shallow. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But the knock was a summons. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake the cabin itself. The air felt thicker here, as if the walls were holding their breath along with me. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen table, the one I'd left on low the night before, and crept downstairs. Each step creaked a little louder than I wanted, the sound bouncing off the empty walls. The knocking stopped as soon as I reached the floor. The silence pressed in on me. I moved toward the kitchen, where the hidden door waited just behind the pantry shelf. My hand trembled as I reached for the screwdriver. The tool felt heavier now, as if burdened by some unseen weight. I pried at the edges again, pushing past the brittle sealant. The door shifted, barely a crack, but enough to let a chill breeze escape. It smelled colder behind there, like earth and forgotten things. Then I heard it. A whisper. So faint it might have been the wind, or my imagination playing tricks. "Open, open." The voice was soft, coaxing, almost sad. I froze. The beam of my flashlight wavered. Was it inside? Or just beyond? I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. The journals, the tapes, Grandpa's warnings, they all pointed to something locked away for a reason. Yet here I was. The lock was giving way. The door creaked open wider, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of moss and old stone. A faint glow pulsed below, like a heartbeat made visible. I knew I should turn back. I knew that what waited below might change everything. But I stepped forward. Chapter 5. The Threshold. My fingers trembled as I reached toward the edge of the hidden door. The air around me seemed to thicken, heavy with anticipation, like the moment just before a storm breaks. Every instinct screamed to pull back, but curiosity, dark and unyielding, pushed me forward. With a slow, deliberate motion, I slid the latch open. The door creaked, protesting after years of silence, and the shadows behind it seemed to ripple, as if breathing. Beyond was a narrow staircase descending into the black abyss beneath the cabin. The walls were lined with ancient symbols carved deep into the wood, their meaning lost but their power unmistakable. A faint, otherworldly glow pulsed at the bottom. I swallowed hard and stepped down, the wooden stairs groaning beneath my weight. Each step carried me deeper into a world my grandfather had hidden away, a place where the boundary between our world and something else had worn thin. At the base of the stairs, the glow intensified, revealing a stone altar etched with more of the cryptic symbols. On it lay a small, weathered box bound in iron. I reached out, fingers brushing the cold metal. A whisper brushed past my ear, so soft I thought I imagined it. "You've come. Now it begins." I froze. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut above me, plunging me into darkness, the faint glow from the altar the only thing guiding me forward into the unknown. Chapter 6. The Awakening. The box felt heavier than it looked, cold to the touch, as if it held a secret too ancient to bear. I hesitated, the whisper still echoing in my mind, mixing with the pounding of my heart. With a deep breath, I unclasped the iron bindings. The lid creaked open, revealing a faded parchment and a small black stone, smooth, almost alive in my palm. As I lifted the stone, the glow from the altar flared wildly, casting twisted shadows that danced along the walls. The symbols around me pulsed, throbbing like a heartbeat. A low hum filled the chamber, growing louder, vibrating through my bones. The parchment fluttered, despite the still air, and words began to form on its surface. Words I couldn't read but somehow understood. "You are the key. The seal is broken. The gate will open, but so will the darkness." A cold wind swept through the chamber, and the stone pulsed once more in my hand, warm now, almost alive. I realized then that whatever my grandfather had locked away, it wasn't just a secret. It was a warning. And now I was the one who had unleashed it. Chapter 7. The Gate. That night, sleep was impossible. The black stone sat on my bedside table, its surface faintly glowing, pulsing with a slow rhythm that seemed to match my own heartbeat. Every time I closed my eyes, the room twisted into shadows and whispers, the boundary between dream and reality blurring. When morning came, I found a strange scratch on the floorboards near the hidden door, almost like a symbol, but jagged and fresh, as if carved by something unseen. My skin prickled. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Back in the crawlspace, I laid out everything I'd gathered, the journals, the tapes, the black stone, and the mirror. The pieces felt connected, but how? I needed to understand what I'd awakened. I put on the tape labeled Tape 12, one I hadn't listened to yet. My grandfather's voice crackled through the recorder, weary but urgent. The gate isn't just a door. It's a threshold. A place where the world we know touches what lies beneath. The stone is the key, but it's also the lock. Without it, the gate cannot open. But with it, well, some things are better left closed. The tape ended with a chilling silence. I looked down at the stone. Its glow deepened. Suddenly, the hidden door creaked open a few inches. Cold air spilled out. From the darkness beyond, a faint, low hum began to grow, like a living thing breathing, waiting. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. And I realized I was standing at the edge of something much larger than myself, something my grandfather had spent decades trying to contain. The gate had opened. Chapter 8. The Passage. The cold air from the open door was sharp, carrying a faint scent of earth and something older, ancient, like the deep roots of the forest outside. I hesitated, hand hovering over the black stone, which now felt warmer, almost alive. Steeling myself, I stepped inside. The narrow passage beyond the door was carved from rough stone, walls damp and uneven. Faint symbols glowed dimly along the edges, pulsing in time with the stone in my hand. It felt like the cabin itself was breathing beneath me. I moved forward slowly, the hum growing louder, resonating in my chest. Shadows flickered just beyond the edge of my vision, shapes shifting, neither fully seen nor fully imagined. Halfway down the passage, I spotted a pedestal carved from the same black stone. It was hollowed at the top, as if meant to hold something. Without thinking, I placed the stone inside. The symbols flared brightly, flooding the passage with light. The air vibrated, a deep, resonant tone filling my ears. Then, the floor beneath me shifted. The passage opened into a vast chamber, filled with towering columns etched with runes that pulsed with life. In the center stood a massive gate, wrought from twisted metal and shimmering with an otherworldly glow. I was standing at the threshold of something beyond the world I knew. The gate beckoned, but to where? And what waited on the other side? Chapter 9. Shadows in the Light. The sun was dipping below the horizon when I finally emerged from the cellar, blinking against the sudden brightness. My legs trembled from the cold and the weight of what I had seen down there, a darkness not just in the earth, but in the very air around the cabin. I closed the hidden door behind me and pressed my palm flat against the wooden wall. The knocking had stopped, but the silence felt heavier than before, as if the house was holding its breath. Inside, the cabin looked the same, but I knew better now. The walls had stories, the floorboards carried whispers, and the shadows moved differently. I sat at the kitchen table, the journal spread open before me. Grandpa's handwriting was hurried, almost frantic in places. "The darkness is patient," one note read. "It waits for the light to falter, for the lock to loosen." My fingers trembled as I flipped to the last page. There, scrawled in faded ink, was a single warning. Do not let the past awake. Do not trust the silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I glanced up just in time to see a flicker of movement, something shadowed, slipping past the edge of the porch light. I stood abruptly, heart pounding. The cabin seemed alive now, every creak and sigh a reminder that I was no longer alone. I needed to find out what Grandpa was hiding, but more than that, I needed to prepare for what was coming. Because whatever it wasn't done with me yet. Chapter 10. The Last Light. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace. I sat alone in the cabin, the journal resting on my lap, its pages worn and full of secrets. All the clues had led me here, to this moment. The darkness Grandpa warned about was real, but it wasn't just a force outside. It was inside me, too. The fear, the doubts, the shadows creeping in from every corner. I lit a candle and watched the flame flicker. The light felt fragile, but it was all I had. With every page I'd read, every secret uncovered, I understood one thing clearly. Some shadows can never be fully chased away, but they can be held at bay, for a while. Suddenly, the knocking returned, softer this time, almost like a whisper. I stood and opened the door. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something old and restless. But I didn't step back. This time, I faced the darkness with the last light I had. And as the night stretched on, I made a promise. To keep the past buried, to hold the light steady, and to never let silence fool me again. Because sometimes, the end isn't the end. It's just a beginning cloaked in shadow.